Hello, guys, and welcome back to In Search of Success, where we discuss, dissect, and deconstruct various aspects of life, success, and leadership so that you can receive all the tools and techniques and the strategies and the tactics and the formulas and the frameworks you need to bring your ideas to life, to turn your dreams into reality, and to achieve anything you set your mind to. So, in episode 4 today, our guest is Mr. Mohan Benjamin, who is the country head for Volvo Group University. Mohan has tons of experience in coaching leaders as well as designing, developing, and delivering leadership development programs across the globe. So, Mohan is also a certified corporate and leadership coach. Mohan is also a Franklin Covey certified Speed Up Trust facilitator. So, I have thoroughly enjoyed each second of this discussion and I have learned a ton from him. And Mohan has shared a lot of pearls of wisdom that if you are ready to take ownership of your own development and growth in the corporate world, then you can just take these pearls of wisdom, which are sometimes the tools, sometimes he has shared some wisdom, sometimes it's a quote. He has just shared a lot of pearls of wisdom that you can take back and implement at your workplace to make yourself a better leader and to create a much more engaging and fun workplace. So go ahead, enjoy the discussion. I'll see you at the end of the discussion. So, hi Mohan, welcome to this podcast. And thank you for being here. I'm pretty excited to have you on the show. And I have a huge list of questions here, which I'm going to throw at you. So, how excited are you? How are you doing today?
First of all, thank you so much, Deepak, and I thank you for the opportunity. I think it's always good to touch on common topics that speaks to the heart.
Right.
With that said, I'm thoroughly excited and just waiting to see what's going to come out from this whole dialogue and discussions that we're going to have together.
Right.
And I hope it touches people as well.
Right, that's the hope. So let me begin with not a basic but a fundamental question. When we talk about leader, or you hear the word leader,
right,
what comes to your mind?
Right. So, if you kind of go back to a little historical, theoretical angle of how people have defined leaders, right? We normally say that leadership is about two fundamental aspects. And I think that's one about someone who can create an influence, but also someone who can create an impact in the organization. But over a period of time, in my own experience, Deepak, I think there's one more piece that we're missing, and that's the piece around identity. Right? If I do not identify myself as a leader, which comes to the elements of being authentic, being genuine, then the impact and influence is never going to be conscious.
Absolutely.
Because I always say that if you take away the leader quotient, anyone can make an impact on influence anyway.
Right?
So the question is, if I want to make a conscious impact and influence, then I need to start within. Right. So I think it's about finding that identity. And there's a whole piece that you can build around identity about being authentic, being genuine. What does it mean for me to create an inspiring purpose? So I think it starts there, in terms of what is leadership all about, or who is a leader? These are three components I think we need to touch upon.
Right. So you mentioned influence, impact, and identity. And that kind of, immediately hit my head on the quote that comes from John C. Maxwell. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less.
Yes.
So if that is true, and I am trying to become, let's say I'm an aspiring leader, corporate leader, or I'm an existing leader, and I'm trying to master this art of influence, how would you help me? If you're mentoring me, or if you're advising me, or guiding me, or coaching me, what would be those 2 or 3 things that will start me with? Deepak, do this, and you will slowly start building influence inside the organization, outside the organization. So how would you start with me? How would you mentor me?
Great question, Deepak. But I'm going to take the same author that you spoke about. John C. Maxwell is a smart guy. I think we need to give it to him. If we take that number one, when he says, influence, nothing less, nothing more, he also talks about the 5 levels of leadership.
Yes, right? He does.
And he says sometimes people follow you because they have to. It's your right. It's your position. People follow you because they want to, because of a wavelength match. People follow you because of what you've done for them, what you've, as an impact you've made for the organization, and then the very pinnacle of who you are. Now, here's a catch. Now, in all those 5 levels, influence is there, right? But it's a ripple effect. You are the first person who he needs to kind of cast a stone into the ocean, and then the ripple is something that sometimes may be outside your control.
Mm-hmm.
But then I always ask people, everyone talks about the ripple, but no one talks about what the stone is all about.
Okay.
Now, when you talk about influence, these are two things that I think is important. The first is we need to treat people as people
Mm-hmm.
and not treat people as resources. The moment we think that, okay, it's capacity, I have 10 people in my team, this is how I need to treat them, we get into this whole discussion about becoming a manager rather than being a leader.
Leader.
Right? Because then you're just managing resources in terms of quality, time, and cost. People are not complicated, but I will tell you, people are complex.
Mm-hmm.
So, which means the second step is that one size doesn't fit all. So, you need to actually get personal.
Uh-huh.
So, as a leader is never about entitlement. It is, I need to understand that if Deepak is in my team, what are his pain points? I need to invest in him rather than investing a blanket statement across.
Right.
So that's what I would say, right? So when you talk about influence at a larger scale, these two things that are important. One is to treat people as people, so which means that I need to know not what they do, but who they are. And then the second step is invest. And I only invest if it is important. So the second, it's a simple thing. I only invest if I think there's a return on investment, right?
Absolutely.
So I invest in my people not for the thing of self-interest, but to groom them and grow them, that tomorrow they create a return on investment for the organization.
Right.
So I think if you just have this shift in mindset, I think you will make an exponential difference.
Here is a question. I was having another guest on the podcast, and we were discussing the same thing about mentoring leadership and creating a culture inside the company where every aspiring leader has a
Right.
mentor, and we have a conscious effort to create the next level or succession of leadership, right?
Absolutely.
And being a chief human resources officer, what her input was, it's a lot of companies start these initiatives, right? But
Right.
most of them fail. And that is because whenever you ask someone to mentor, let's say somebody like Deepak has joined the organization and you become the buddy or mentor, and mentor him, the first question is, what's in it for me?
Of
I
course.
have 9 hours or 10 hours of work already scheduled in my day.
Right.
Now I have to add another hour of mentoring for the next 3 months.
Right.
What's in it for me?
Right.
Right. So, do you think this happening or this being a practical challenge that happens inside companies, or how has been your experience around this problem?
No, I think it's a perennial challenge, honest Deepak, because one is when you even invest, there's a time quotient in it. And then the question is, how much should I invest? Or how much time do I have? If I had 8 hours in a day, then I would give this much and so on. But then I always play the devil's advocate here.
Uh-huh.
I said, if things are important for you, this whole chronology of time, the 24 hours doesn't come into picture.
Right.
Let me take my own personal example.
Okay.
I have two kids. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old, son. I might be dead tired at work. I go back at 9 and then I could have like 5 hours of sleep. But the moment I see my son, time is a conundrum. It's nowhere there in the picture.
Right.
I invest enough time just to spend it.
Right.
Whether I like it or not, it's a joy, the fulfillment that I get out of it. Now, that for me is a true mark also from a leadership context.
Mm-hmm.
The first is if I invest, in my people, the concept of time in the context of chronos or the chronology doesn't come.
Mm-hmm.
But if you take this thing that we call as the kairos, where they talk about the Greek thing that in the 24 hours, how much of investment do I want to choose in my team or in a mentor or a mentee is up to you.
Right.
That choice depends on how important that relationship is for you.
Priority. Now you are talking about prioritization, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. But priority is also value. If you value that, you will automatically prioritize it. I think there are no two sides of a coin there. It's exactly the same pillar.
Right. So you mentioned about parenting. Do you think it's a question that kind of always comes to my mind?
Yeah.
Being a parent makes you a better leader, or kind of educates you, experiential education I'm talking about.
Absolutely.
Does it create a better leader at workplace, or parenting and leadership has no overlap? How do you see that aspect?
So it's let me put it this way. I mean, it's tough to say it would make you a better leader or a worse leader. But what I would say is it exposes you to leadership attributes that are important.
Like,
and I'll give you an example, right? Because first of all, if you take parenting, I think that parenting has an integral part in making us better in terms of who we are. It keeps us humble. Like if I take the example of my children as well, I'm not entitled to be the father. I mean, of course, my father is a right. The husband to the wife is my right. But the responsibility of how I can be as a father is about the relationship and how I work towards them.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So the same context in that, if you translate that, that makes me who it makes me a better listener. It makes me say that the way I talk to my son is very different from the way I handle my daughter, to understand that they have different needs, different fulfillments, and so on. That's those attributes of knowing that each of them are unique in their own collective significance is something that you can translate to your organization as well.
Right.
The simple logic that comes back saying that I can't paint my team as a white paint and expect everyone to be exactly the same, but I can laminate them so that they can illuminate their own colors.
Right.
That is something I learned from parenting.
Right.
The second thing to also understand is dealing with ambiguity, also something that I learned through parenting. Right? Like you would want your daughter to be a certain way, but you end up going in a completely different direction. But then you support the journey.
Right.
Right? To an investment saying that, okay, if it's important for you to kind of, if that's a path that is charted for you, I will support you. So, which means that the growth of your team is never self interested. It is not that you grow according to my standards, but you grow to be a better version of you.
Right.
Not to be a better version of me. Right. Does it make sense?
It makes sense because I think this is how I would interpret it.
Right.
We were doing evolution of leadership, right? How it has evolved over the last few decades. And if you go back to the 90s or 80s, right, the rule was this is how we have been doing it, right?
Yes.
So do as you are told. Don't try to be, yourself. Just do as you are told.
Yes.
Now there are self-managed teams. And as a leader, it becomes my job to identify the strengths and weaknesses of team members and allow them to grow to become their best version.
Absolutely.
So it's their way, not my way as a leader. It's their way. So I think that's precisely what you're mentioning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. Going back to the question of influence, you mentioned that I have to first know my team and then invest in my team. That's the starting point for influence, right?
Correct.
But whenever the word influence comes in the context of leadership, I believe there is another word that comes in by default. It's trust. Because as a leader, if my employees don't trust me, there is no way they're going to stand behind my vision and support me, make that vision a reality, right?
100%. Yeah.
So apart from creating influence, or in order to create influence, what should I do as a leader to become more trustworthy so that my team can trust in me, my customers, my business, my management can trust in me more? So what would be those one or two things in terms of behaviors or habits would you advise me?
Oh, wow. And I can tell you the trust topic itself is huge, and we can have another podcast around that.
Agreed.
But I mean, I would like to quote the words again here of Stephen Covey, because I think it's very relevant, and I'm just going to exemplify what he says. And he talks about something called the 4 cores of credibility, right? And he says to build trust, there are trusts of 2 aspects. That people trust you either because of your character or they trust you because of your competence. Right? And I take this example that, all of us have gone in a plane, but we've never asked a pilot, do you know how to fly, before we go A to B.
Never.
We just trust them because of their competence.
Right.
But on the other hand, I trust my parents to death, but I will never trust my mother to fly a plane.
Of course.
Right? Because of who she is and the character. But what makes me credible as a leader is to have that balance of both. That they see me as someone who is character driven, who's congruent to their values. And for me, that congruent to values is integrity, that's standing up for what you believe in, not for what others tell you to believe in, right? So that is integrity. And the second piece on character is this element of intent. Do you have the right intent for your people?
Right.
If my intent is self-interested, if it is malicious, no matter what I do, I'm never going to earn trust. I'm only going to be demanding it at some point of time.
Right.
But then the second piece is the observable characteristics, which is about competence. So I need to also be a capable leader, right? I can't only talk but not walk the talk, right? So I need to have the right competence, the right capabilities to be able to perform my job well in order for them to some extent exemplify or follow the attributes.
Right.
But the fourth piece and the last piece on competence is results. I need to be consistent in the way of deal things.
Right.
Now, any one of these, if I lose foundation of it, I will lose trust in my team from a credible standpoint.
Got it.
Right? So when you talk about influence, it starts there. Like you said, influence is just something that I believe is influence for me is an attribute of the ripple. It's not the stone.
Yes.
Trust is the stone,
So,
right?
yes.
Like you said. So you really, and how do you build trust is, of course, like I said, sometimes you just have to listen. You have to build your character. You have to get more credible. You have to consciously, question your own intent. You need to be someone who's strong with your integrity, but also show them that you're someone who walks the talk. I always say that if you can tell, Deepak, hold me accountable to this standard, and you can confidently say that and publicize this, then that is someone that you can actually say, I am a strong leader.
Right.
And when I do this, very hard, I've seen very few leaders who are able to take that step.
Right.
They hold me on this. Because then it's a larger accountability piece.
Right.
That's what it is. Because then we don't walk the talk.
Right.
So you're absolutely right. So, you can go on and on with trust, and then he goes on to speed of trust. And, so I don't want to get into those because then we would have another piece. But I would say these are the fundamentals of trust, Deepak. That it is something that we need to focus on.
So as a leader, what I'm taking away is if I have to earn trust at workplace, I should have integrity. Right?
Absolutely.
And I have to just walk the talk, and I have to show, because there is another part of learning here. If you look at parenting, there is a guiding principle in parenting that children don't listen to parents. They just imitate. What you do, it gets repeated. What you tell doesn't matter at all, right? Similarly, as a leader, if you're saying something and not walking the talk, your team is going to follow suit there, right? Basically,
absolutely.
You are not going to. And another one, in the previous episode of the interview, one of the guests said that leadership means you are always on the stage. Everybody's looking at you, they're observing you, and they're going to imitate your behavior. So right. Integrity makes a lot of sense. And my intent should be clear to myself, and probably if I have clarity of intent, that will automatically be visible and receivable by my team members, is what I understand.
Right.
Then you mentioned about capability and results.
Correct.
Without them, there will be nobody following me and working with me. So that makes a lot of sense. Right. 4 things you mentioned here. And you mentioned about holding me accountable. Right?
Yes.
That's a very daring thing for a leader to do. It's
exactly
good thing, but it takes a lot of courage, right?
Exactly.
So in that context, I have 2 questions.
Please.
If I am a leader, this is again something that repeatedly I have seen, and probably you must have heard also. Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam kind of shares this story where PSLV launch is happening, and the first year it fails. Correct. And then the team is shielded, and the director goes and attends the press conference, right? The next year, when it is successful, the team is exposed. You go and attend the press conference. So it takes a lot of courage for a leader to know when to take responsibility of failure, and in case of success or achievements, how to pass the credibility and things like that. So it takes a lot of courage. So as a leader, how do I develop courage? Or it's only a born trend, and it goes back to the perennial statement that leaders are born, not made, and stuff like that, right? Because I know, and I think you also believe that leaders are created. There are aspects you can have as a personality trait. Everybody could be coached and mentored to become a leader, right? If I am working towards becoming a better leader tomorrow, to become my best version of a leader, how do I develop courage in the workplace? Second thing, once I have courage, it's required for a lot of different things. One example I said, to give credit, not take, give credit. It takes courage, right?
Of course.
The second thing I believe it takes courage is to ask for feedback, seek feedback. Right?
Absolutely.
And I don't think there are a lot of leaders who are actively looking for feedback from the team, from the customers, from the management. Hey, I did this thing, or we're doing this thing. How are we doing? Can you just give me some feedback? That never happens. So I think that also needs a lot of courage. So how do I develop courage, and what should I do to be at that stage where I can go ahead and ask my team, hey guys, how am I doing as your boss or leader? What do you think I can improve on?
Brilliant questions. And I think I'm going to break it down into three parts, Deepak.
Please.
I mean, since you brought up, this, which came first, chicken or the egg, are leaders born or made?
Right.
It's something that I've heard time and again when I speak in different institutions.
Right.
But I've come up with a different spin, and maybe you might agree or disagree with it. But I believe they are neither. I think leaders are molded. That's the word I would like to use.
Leaders
are molded,
okay,
like clay, right?
Hey.
Because of course, like you said, there are certain times where there are inherent traits that we've kind of gotten, but there are also times that we kind of inculcate over a period of time that makes us who we are.
Okay.
Now, every successful leader, if you go around, whether you take the John C. Maxwell's or even like you said, APJ, everybody had someone behind who kind of molded them to become a better version of who they are. Every successful leader has built an experience around them. Right. And it is through, mentors or mentees or role models that have kind of molded them over a period of time to continuously become a better version of themselves.
Right.
But also to translate that every successful leader has never reached a pinnacle of saying, this is my destination. Right. There is that journey beyond that we need to continue. Right. So that's the first thing, that if I take a first part, that for me, I think it's molded.
Okay.
Now, in those experiences, what has kind of built courage? And, like we always say, to become courage, if you take life as well, the moment I take that leap of faith, there's courage that comes automatically in. It's biological, right? Okay. Because sometimes there's a lot of fear of uncertainty. I do not know whether I'm going to fail or not. I do not know if I do this and so on. So what leaders tend to lean towards is title. Well, I have this as a position, so I'll use my entitlement to translate what I want to give to the organization.
Right.
But that is still coming out of fear.
Yeah. Insecurity, right? And fear.
It is insecurity. It is intrinsic thing about, I do not know if I know what I know, or I do not know if they take it the same. So I will use my title as a way of leading. Now, for me, like I always said, sometimes to be able to say, hey, I do not know this, to a team member is also a mark of courage.
Right.
But to get down to that point, I think the first thing is to have humility. To understand that all leaders are also human beings, right? You can't take away that context. So which means as a human being, we all have our strengths, we all have our flaws, we all have our blind spots, but we also have someone who, in my own area of weakness, can be my biggest pillar of strength.
Right.
The first thing is to acknowledge it. And that's again coming back to my piece of identity, Deepak, that sometimes identity is always twofold. Either I can create an identity for myself, or you can create it for me. Like the world. The world can say, this is how Mohan should be. And then, so for me to strengthen my identity, I need to know what my purpose in life is, and I need to embrace my flaws. So which means that I know that this is my weakness, but to also bring it out to the open and say, hey, take me as I am. I think that's the first step of courage, being vulnerable to your team. Right? I think that's, and then once you kind of do that, your team also starts to see that, hey, my leader is not in a position of entitlement, but is in a position of saying, hey, that's their role. It's what they do, but it's not who they are.
Right.
I'm able to connect. And I always believe that, a leader is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of people who are in charge.
Yeah, right. Awesome.
So then I can have 5 team members, but they can all be leaders in their own way. So I can learn from them.
Right.
So when I have a team member as a leader, I become a follower. And I think it's a collective significance over individual arrogance. I think that is something that we need to take away. Less of ego, more of humility. And then if you're able to communicate your intent with transparency and communicate who you are as a person, I think courage is not as difficult as you think it is. It will come.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. It's practical and it makes a lot of sense.
Right.
So you mentioned about learning. I believe most of the leaders I study and people who stand out as leaders by default, right?
Right.
Whether you go to political leadership, whether you go to social leadership, whether you go to military leadership, or whether you go to business leadership, right? All the time you'll see these top 20%, top 5% leaders, they always stand out. And almost all of them are continuous learners, not necessarily readers of books and stuff.
Of
Some
course.
of them also read books regularly, but
Of
they're
course.
all continuous learners, and they are very curious,
Of course.
right? So that's kind of the mindset, plus continuous learning is the skill set, right? So if I have to ask you
Mhm.
that, as an organization, I have
Mhm.
been given the responsibility of creating a workplace or
Right.
creating a culture at the workplace which where continuous learning is kind of encouraged, it's kind of supported, and in all that way. So
Right.
what would be your advice, tactical advice, that Deepak, do these things if you are to create a culture of continuous learning? Do these things, for example, in terms of policies, bring out policies where you support your senior leadership or any manager to go out and join a higher education program, and you will support it. That's just one
Abs-
example. What are
Absolutely.
some other examples where employees get a message that yes, our company has a culture where continuous learning is supported, it's encouraged, it's rewarded also when necessary? So how do I create that culture of continuous learning as a leader?
Great question, Deepak. And I can tell you here that, as an organization proud to be in Volvo, I think this is something that we consciously focus on, right?
Right.
But I'll also take the leadership domain because that's the area that we're kind of talking on. The first thing that we do is we've moved away from isolated programs to interventions, right?
Okay.
If
Okay.
you believe that leadership is a journey, then it is a journey that we need to invest in,
Right.
right? So we have programs right from leading self unto leading others and leading through others, but they're interventions in itself. So it gives the idea is to give them space to introspect, but retrospect to go back, try, fail, learn, come back, share, and go back. So it's
Right.
a journey,
Right.
right? Because then it's like what we call as a testing ground, right?
Right.
You test out before you get into the battle.
Right.
So I think that's number one that we did. The second thing that we've also done is all our training programs are accessible to every employee.
Okay.
So we have not defined the training path saying this is for you, Deepa. You define your journey,
Right.
right? Because you know the best in terms of what is your growth, what is your potential. Of course, you have support systems like your manager and your team members and so on, but you define your path. And you can take any training program under the sun,
Mhm.
but it's your journey, and your manager tends to help you support you in that piece.
Right.
That's one.
Right.
But then, like you said, we also have strong higher education policies as well. That if you want to kind of take something that would support your journey, that is also something accessible.
Right.
Right now, these are interventions in itself. But in these interventions, I would like to touch two things. We have two specific, whether you call them processes or technologies. I don't know what you call them. One is what we call as a self-managed learning.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
There is a 9-month intervention program where there is no facilitator, there is no trainer. It's only participants where they coach each other,
Okay.
right? Peer-to-peer coaching on learning objectives and challenges that they have. There's only an advisor. I
Okay.
advise you on the process, but I do not advise you on the content.
Contact. Okay. Got it.
But it's a brilliant program. We have emerging leaders who have translated into first-line managers in a shift because
Okay.
they've built that capability, but they've learned from each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one fundamental thing that we've done. Another program that we also have is called the peer-to-peer learning, that
Mm-hmm.
you learn from your peers.
Mm.
But my peers can also be from different industries.
Right.
So it is not a senior leader coming and saying, hey, this is how you should do,
Right.
because then you do it in my shadow.
Right.
You create your light, you build your own shadow,
Right.
you figure out what is the light you want to kind of encompass and build it. But I will help you, you know. So you share peer to peer. And I think this is a fundamental thing that has changed the course of our learning culture.
Okay.
Because here people are not afraid to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
They're also vulnerable.
Right.
And I've always said there's a difference of saying I have failed many times, but I've learned, than rather than saying I'm a failure.
Right.
Because if you don't do this intervention to give them space, to practice and learn and share, as a leader, they try out one instance and come back and say, "Oh, I have failed. I'm a failure."
Right.
That is a mindset shift we want to make, and I think we've
Absolutely.
done this fairly well. So.
Right. So you're advising peer-to-peer learning should be encouraged. So how much time and what kind of space, what kind of practices are you referring to here? Anything that you want to share?
Yeah, so like I said, we have one training program that's called the Exploration for Emerging Leaders.
Okay.
It is a 9-month intervention, so it's
Right.
that much of a time.
Right. Right.
It's spread over 11 full days, but we have different set meetings. So initially, they come and decide on the learning objectives. The first on day one, they talk about their life, and I think this is important. Just to give you a very simple example, if I take a minute, they do something called the lifeline journey.
Okay.
So we say you don't bring your role to work, you bring who you are to that training program.
Absolutely.
Right? Because as a coach, right, we can of course coach on what, but eventually the who part is also kind of embodied in the whole journey.
Right.
Right? So the lifeline, what it automatically does is it creates trust, because when we say you are open to share how much you have 45 minutes airtime, speak what you would like to.
Mm-hmm.
So some people go on to details of ups and downs, pillars where they've kind of, had various downs. Sometimes it gets emotional. But what it does, it creates trust. It creates vulnerability. It creates to say, hey, I'm here to learn.
Right.
I think that's the first crack.
Right.
That there is no one better than me. There is no one worse than me. We're all the same.
Same. Right.
That's the first step. And then, of course, you talk about learning objectives where they do a little bit of 360-degree feedback. They come, they coach each other. Now the coaching is with the intent to know that, hey, we're here to support each other.
Right.
So all the pillars are the same pillars of strength. Right? There is no one better than the other.
Got it.
And this journey is over a 9-month piece.
Right.
So this is just a simple example of how much space and investment for one program that we do only for our emerging leaders.
Right. So there are small and medium scale companies which are pretty budget tight, right? But this is something they can take back and implement pretty easily. This doesn't need additional budget, additional technology. Nothing comes into picture, I believe.
Right.
It's something that's easily implementable.
Easily implementable, and I can tell you that this whole training is run by internal trainers, so there is no cost associated with it. It's only value, right? It is only return on investment. It's only return on effectiveness,
right?
Most of our
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that most of our leadership programs is also run by internal trainers.
Okay.
So in equipping them, you create a learning culture of saying, hey, if I need to talk this, I also need to walk it. Right. So we build internal trainers, we build a learning culture. For them, it's also a growth. They also build confidence.
Right.
And tomorrow, we've also seen participants who are part of the program become set advisors for the same training.
Right.
What more shift do you need, Deepak? You don't need to look at impact. That itself speaks words.
Makes a lot of sense. I think people listening could take this back and start doing this simple thing, and maybe they'll benefit in their own ways. Pretty exciting. So coming to leadership development, I have a couple of questions that was running in my head for last 2 days. So I've just penned them down. What, according to you, is when I am a leader, let's say I'm a CXO, and I'm kind of looking for creating the next set of CXOs or next generation leaders, right? So when I'm doing that, what is the best raw material in terms of creating leaders who are who have integrity, who are influential, who are trustworthy people, and who are results, basically executioners, I could say, right? So if I'm working on a project to create the next generation of leaders, as they say, it's garbage in, garbage out. So in my program, what kind of raw material should come in, and how do I identify who are these next generation leaders? What are they doing at their workplaces that I can say, hey, out of the 240 senior executives I have, these 20 are the people we should, and this is why these are the 20 selected. So if I'm trying to run a program inside my company, let's say I'm a small, medium scale company with 2,000 employees or 1,000 employees, I'm trying to do this, that next 20 leaders should be developed. So how do I identify them? Who are the proper raw materials for developing leaders? So
I think tough question. I'm not sure if I can do justice to it, but I'll try. So I think in terms of identification, I think number one is these are people who have built credibility. And I'll then explain how can we do that as well, not on the 4 cores, but one is build credibility. They've also built visibility, right? And the third one is a sense of adaptability, right? Now, why do I bring this is that you would start to see that sometimes there are people who are so bound by their job description. This is what I'm called to do.
Boundaries,
right? And those boundaries are, oh, this is my job description, this is what I'm paid to do, and that's what it is. And what happens is my job description becomes my ballpark, it becomes what it is, and I become a prisoner of my own, job. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But the other thing that I've also said, the first thing is simple leaders or simple authentic leaders or genuine leaders start to go beyond roles.
Right.
The responsibility is larger than just the team itself. It is not even for the department, I would say, to larger organization. Right. Now, with that larger responsibility, if you take the quote of, I think it was Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
The responsibility concept comes with a lot of letting go of my own self-interest, letting go of my own purpose. It is never about me anymore.
Right. Right.
Right. But then it is also about making every effort to support other teams for the larger organization. Now, I'm a learning space, right? Which means that I need to support my people in my recruitment space, people in my other HR, support my business in
Right.
creating collective value or a regional value or end-to-end perspective. And I can tell you, it's not hard to identify people like that who do it, because then you will see that they are automatically visible. Stakeholder management comes easy to them. Stepping out of their comfort zone comes easy to them. Becoming adaptive. So you don't really have to create a program around it. But what you need to do as an organization is to create opportunities. Right?
Opportunities.
Yes. When I say opportunities, is to give them opportunities to have space to play it out. Like if I have a learning team, I need to give them opportunity to say, hey, go test out the waters. Why don't you create a cross-functional project with another team? Why don't you do a business project with a business and come up with some kind of a business challenge, come up with a proof of concept? Why don't you create a side program, which is a collaboration of 3 other teams? Give them opportunities. Then you'll automatically start to see the natural players, the ones who really want to make an effort, the ones that will come natural. And I think there the identification becomes fairly easy.
Okay. So this is how I'm interpreting. Again, I have a worldview. So when I consume something like this, I have something that is popping up in my head.
Please.
So you mentioned about 3 things. You mentioned about credibility, visibility, adaptability, right?
Right.
And you mentioned the approach that these people will automatically stand out, right? And they are not bound to their job descriptions.
Correct.
So the words that are popping in my head is these are people who take initiatives and they take ownership. Of course, any problem that is happening around the organization, it might not be in their job description, but they see a problem, they see an opportunity, and they're jumping on it. Initiative and ownership of that, and they're trying to solve it. They might not have the resources, they might not have all the need, but they're not giving that excuse. Hey, this is beyond my job limit. I don't have time for this. I do not have the right resources. Management is not supporting. All that is not there. So initiative and ownership are these 2 words kind of in line with what you're trying to say here in terms
100%.
Okay.
So I would actually take leadership and expand it to 3 other things called the OAR, which is ownership, accountability, and responsibility.
Okay.
There are times when we need to be owners of the larger purpose.
Right.
Because then the purpose is common, so it's not my boss's purpose, it's mine. We own the purpose.
Yes.
Right. But then if I own the purpose from a particular role and responsibility, there's certain accountability that I need to take into account.
Right.
That also means that I need to become responsible for certain failures or mistakes or other things that I have. And can I learn from it?
Right.
So I think it is these 3 steps. But it starts with that. Do we have the same purpose? Do we have the shared vision? So as a leader, all the leaders kind of buy into the shared purpose. That's number 1.
Right.
But as you said, a leader without accountability is a facade. Let me be very blunt.
Right.
A leader who doesn't take responsibility is not a credible leader. Right. And then a leader who does not take any kind of ownership, accountability, or responsibility, I don't want to say he's a manager, but generally just another person who's saying, okay, leadership by position.
Right.
Or entitlement.
Yeah, position leadership, not personal leadership. It's position leadership. Basically.
Exactly. Right.
Makes a lot of sense. So here is the question. Let's say I identified these 20 people.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. And I'm trying to take advantage of your specific experience, and I have to develop a leadership development program for these people, right? So what are the core components of creating a leadership development program that helps me create
these next generation of leaders? Is it like, what is the core component? Are we talking about, as you said, are we talking about on the job learning? We are talking about experiential learning. We are talking about higher education that we support. It's a mix of this, or you have some other component that would you advise? What will be the core components of a very impactful leadership development program for small and medium scale companies and people who are trying to implement them?
Good question, Deepak. Now, I think in Volvo Group, we follow a model called, what we call as a game changers as well. But it's called the 70-20-10 principle. That 70%, of course, is experiential.
Okay.
Right? Now, if I touch upon it a little bit, is before I jump into the 20 and 10.
Right.
As kids, we experience a lot more. We are more kinesthetic.
Right.
Like you said, this whole thing about, they follow our actions rather than our words.
Right.
It's action oriented experience. We experience more than just the words come in, and then eventually we articulate it. Right.
Right.
So we've always seen that also translates into becoming human beings. That over a period of time, that kinesthetic learning, action oriented learning, experiential learning tends to be the major piece.
Right.
So in all our interventions, 70% is experiential. That's something that we need to understand.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
The 20% is what we call as exposure.
Okay.
Which is that there is something that I know that you don't know, Deepak, and there's something that I don't know that you know.
Right.
And there's something that we can learn from each other.
Right.
So all our training programs never has a homogeneous mix of participants from the same department.
Right.
It is a mix of different, people from different industries with different, diverse, generational diversities, different, regional diversities, because then the exponential understanding, exponential thought process is a lot more.
Right.
And then your 10% is where a traditional theoretical learning, practical context comes into picture.
Right.
Right. Now, this is how I would kind of structure any program. Be it technical leadership, whatever it is. But then you said that when leaders come in, what is one thing that I think I would start off with to develop the program is on leading self before you even think about leading the team.
Okay.
Start with you, because I think this is something we have not done really well, not as an organization, but in society at large.
At large, yes.
That we have never said, hey, I need to take care of myself also sometimes.
Right.
Before I can try and take care of the team. Right. I'm in that picture as well. So this whole thing of identity comes back again, I always have this joke with my team.
Mm-hmm.
If I, as a leader, cannot, define what is my purpose, what is my vision, and where do I want to go, tomorrow my team members are going to ask me the same thing as a leader. What is your vision? What is your purpose? And then I lose my credibility.
Right.
It's this concept of this is who I am. This is integral to who I am as a leader.
Right.
That's a component that in any leadership intervention, I think that's a module we need to have.
Okay.
Build authenticity, building your concept of who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the process on the 70-20-10, I think is something that I would say I would recommend.
I want to go back to one word you mentioned, because that is fascinating to me. When we are talking about ideas, we are talking about learning from each other. The word diversity, you mentioned about geographic diversity, you mentioned about generational diversity. What would be some of the diversities that you would, gender diversity, of course, what would be some of the diversities if you have experienced, you want to share? Because ideas from generations will differ, ideas from geographies will differ, ideas from different cultures will differ, gender definitely have different ideas. So it's fascinating to me. So tell me.
Right. No, I think the concept of diversity, I don't think we have done justice to the number of diversities that we can. Right. It's like an onion. The more you peel, the more deeper it gets.
True.
Right? And the more deeper it gets, sometimes the more offensive it can become if we don't include them.
Right.
Because like we said, I can give you a simple example. Name diversity can also be a challenge, right?
Okay.
Like the concept of Kiran. In the South and the North, Kiran could be a male or a female, depending on how you see it.
Right.
That's a diversity in itself. I mean, just as a name concept. But I'm just saying at a higher level, when you start to peel it out, you start to see that experience also becomes a diversity. The concept of modern learners, right, from the baby boomers up to the Gen Z or the millennials or the Gen Ys is also a diversity in itself. The generational diversity is one, but in that generation diversity, there are different learners.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can give you a very simple example. If you take the Gen Zs, the people from the 1990s, we would assume that they are the more technology advanced, and unfortunately, we create an unconscious bias there, or a conscious bias, right? But then the moment you kind of put them and saying, okay, you guys are more technology advanced, we create stereotypes.
Right.
There itself, you have various diversities. There you have diversity again, the whole piece of I am an individual learner, I am an introvert, you're an extrovert, I am a thinker, you are a feeler. If you take the whole MBTI and break it down.
Right.
So to answer your question, there is no limit to the number of diversities. But I think the first thing is to understand there is diversity. And the second piece is to try as much as possible to be inclusive.
Inclusive, right.
Just being aware and without inclusion, again, is not really.
Knowledge action gap, huh?
Exactly. It is a gap. Exactly.
Now, okay, I understood the three core components, 70-20-10, of creating a leadership development program. Now, how do I evaluate such a program?
So we actually
working, not working. That's what I'm trying to understand. Because if it's working, then we do more of what is working. If it's not working, then we do less of what is not working. But how do we do that?
Right. And I have a three-pronged approach here. One is what I call as a quantitative evaluation. One is what I call a qualitative evaluation. And then one is what I call a visible evaluation. And that's my journey. Let me explain what I mean.
Okay.
Right. A quantitative evaluation is your basic L1. If you go to a restaurant, how was the food on a rate of scale? You use a Likert scale, 1 to 5. That's great. Right. Today we use the Kirkpatrick evaluation, right? Which you all know is from L1 to L4, and you can measure the impact. We use that as well.
Okay.
The qualitative evaluation starts to jump on in all our leadership interventions. We have this L2 and L3 and L4, where, of course, post an intervention 3 months down the line, you come back and ask them, has there been a change in behavior? You do a little bit of 360-degree feedback, the effectiveness, and then you again translate that into a quantitative understanding.
Right.
But then what I call as my third piece, which is more a visible impact, which, it is there, right? Like I always say that, I can't say, Deepak, I trust you 20%, I don't trust you 80%. I either trust you or I don't, right?
Right.
The same logic is if I see an emerging leader who's taken a training program and tomorrow become a trainer in itself and has created leaders, I don't need to qualify him, nor do I need to get his quantitative feedback.
Right.
I have already seen the impact and the ripple effect it's already created.
Right.
So I can tell you a lot of times we discount that. We get so stuck with structure that we tend to forget and open our eyes and say, hey, these are things that you also see.
Right.
The investments I make today will actually create a change for people tomorrow.
Right.
Right. And I think this is something that I personally believe in that. Now, I just want to kind of digress a bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, please.
Right. And I want to take the saying of Stephen Covey again, because I think it will change our view. He talks about there are 4 L's in life that we all live all the time. We love, we learn, but we leave a legacy when we die.
Right. Right.
But I always said, flip it. If tomorrow, if I want my team members of my organization to say, hey, this is how, or today, if I want to say, this is how I want people to see Mohan as my legacy,
right?
Will it change the way I live, love, and learn today? And here you will see it will, right? Because then I make a conscious effort of how I live. I make a conscious effort of how I love, conscious of how I learn to create a legacy that I want people to see.
Right.
Right. And that's where I think the fundamental issue is. So even with learning, if I come with an intent to learn and make a conscious effort to learn, I come with the intent as not as a checklist, your job is already half done.
Mm-hmm.
I can promise you and I can tell you the efficacy that we've seen. And that is also one of our game changers called before, during, and after.
Right.
Every training, we do a before component. Either it has a manager discussion or a dialogue, it has a 360-degree feedback, or there's a pre-work. And then right after the training, there's an evaluation plus what we also call as dialogues and post-work and so on. This whole closure of the loop, if you come with the right intent to learn, you will go with the right intent to invest also.
Right.
So there, like I said, impact is something that is visible.
Right.
I don't really need to measure it, to be blunt. Yeah.
Right. Now, if I'm taking these, let's say, managers and making them leaders, right? Or let's not call managers, let's call them non-leaders, and we are making them leaders through this leadership development program or this intervention. Can you shed some light on the question that if I'm taking a non-leader and trying to transition him or make him into a leader, are there different stages in between? There are 3 stages, there are 6 stages. This is the first stage where the identifier of the first stage is this particular person, he or she has now understood, let's say, about influence. I don't know. And how to become trustworthy. Let's say there is second stage, which is about communication. I don't know. I'm just blabbering some words out, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, are there actually definitive stages in developing a non-leader into a leader? If yes, how many stages, and what is your experience around this particular thing?
Yeah. So I wouldn't call it stages, but of course there are, definite visible checkpoints that you can see that people have gone through. Right?
Okay.
I normally start, since if we take the coaching example, the first thing that I normally start off with is asking them to define yourself as a leader, as an elevator pitch, or in one sentence.
Okay.
Right? And you always get a mix. And I've seen that normally, traditionally, 85% of the people who do that will talk about my role. This is, I'm a delivery man in this. And then that the starting point is that they see themselves again as entitlement. So I think that's the first checklist. So then I start to coach them on breaking that point of it's beyond who you are, the difference between a leader and a manager. While manager is about quality, time, and cost, and leadership is about people, to get that fundamental essence, right? That's number one.
Right.
The second thing that I also kind of look at as a checkpoint is to see how much of a blind spot that can I make into an open arena.
Okay.
Right? Now these blind spots of things of, is the iceberg really bigger below the surface, is something that some people that I've seen as leaders have no idea.
Right.
They think that the iceberg, if you understand the analogy of the iceberg, that we know that the unseen is what makes us who we are a lot more. The unseen is where our energy is, our attitudes, our beliefs, our value system, everything is below. But a lot of the traditional, again, like you said, non-leaders, if I take that context, focus more on strategy, vision, and so on. And they expect that is the one that will take the organization going forward.
Right.
Not realizing that this component is what is also kind of pulling you up or pulling you down.
Right.
So that's my second component. And I normally use what, in coaching, we use this wheel of life model or the grow model, just to kind of see how do you kind of operate and transit to understand, hey, there is this below the iceberg which is still you,
right,
but let's make it a little more conscious. That's my second point.
Okay.
And the moment you're able to kind of tackle that milestone of now saying that, hey, there is a who, component of me rather than the what.
Right.
Then I think it becomes easier in terms of then asking them what would it mean if your team members had to kind of define what is important for them, right? What would they say about you?
Right.
And then you kind of just work out attributes, about humility or being approachable and available. And then you take that journey.
Right.
And to answer your question, I think you used the word definitive. I don't think there is a definitive milestone.
Okay.
But I think there are adaptive milestones.
Okay.
Like for me, leadership is not a destination. It's a journey, like I said. But a journey towards a certain direction. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But of course, there are many roads that can lead to it. And those many roads depends on which part of the road I am in already or which part of the site I am.
Right.
But you need to start there. You can't bring everybody into the same boat and say, hey, let's go the same way. Because we work with people. And then, like I said, it comes back to the same complexity that people are different.
Right. People are different.
Yeah. And I think one important skill, and I want to maybe just, kind of close this loop with this question, is one important skill that we miss or we take for granted is situational leadership or adaptive leadership. This whole concept of one size fits all does not work. Right? We think it in our head, but we act it out the same way.
Right.
Because situations today, and which also means that situational leadership can also mean that the same team for 5 years in my team can also go through various situations.
Right.
Which means I still need to adapt accordingly.
Right.
But the same leader to my team that I was 1 year ago might have to be a very different leadership style depending the situation they are in today.
Right.
Like I said, the pandemic has taught us a lot of things that we were never sure of.
Right.
Right. So I think that's the journey that I would actually coach them to kind of start off from moving from a subconscious, unconscious state to really kind of becoming conscious of who you are, what does it mean for the team,
Right.
and how can you take the journey? Because a leader without a team is an individual,
Got it.
right? And my dad, I love to take my dad because I think he's one of my biggest role models on a personal life. He always said that those who follow a crowd will never be followed by a crowd,
Right.
right? Uh, which simply means that at some point of time, you need to take that, your own individuality, your own uniqueness, and bring it. But let people see it,
Right.
right? And that is hard. So we just kind of follow the norms. And sometimes that following the norm becomes we follow every other leader, right? But that's
Right.
also wrong, as we
Right.
know, right? So I think I would, like I said, it is milestones or checks that I would keep, but I wouldn't, it's a journey. It's not a definitive progress that I would call it.
What you said kind of resonates a lot with how I think about leadership development, because as I said, I focus on the particular person. So leadership to me is a lot about self-discovery.
Right.
When I know about my own, as you said, my attitude, my belief system, my limiting beliefs, and what's holding me, the under the bottom part of the iceberg, right? Once I know the more about who part, I think it becomes much easier to become open and accept and be vulnerable.
Of course.
Be who you are, be authentic, right? So yes, it made a lot of sense. So coming back to your, I think it's a favorite part out of influence, impact, and identity. I think identity is where you are going again and again. So let's
Yeah.
discuss identity.
Please do, yeah.
What do you mean by the identity of a leader? How do you develop that? And normally, somebody who has a non-leader identity, does it become a huge challenge to make them into a leader's identity? Or what do you mean by this identity? Let's start with that.
See, I think, identity for me is not about first leadership or individualistic. Identity is about knowing who you are.
Who you are.
Irrespective of whether you're a leader or not. Let's start there.
Right.
Right? But like I said, this whole thing about identity is always twofold.
Mm-hmm.
Either you can create an identity that people can start to come back and say, hey, this is who Mohan is.
Right.
Or someone else can create an identity for you if you are not strong in your value system.
Right.
Right. Like I give a very simple example. I mean, it sounds very cliched here, but if 100 people tell me, Mohan, you're a useless guy, the more I believe it, it becomes my identity. Right. Then what is happening is I'm always kind of seeking validation to prove them wrong. So even if I'm now the leader, I'm always trying to prove, saying, hey, I'm not useless, I'm useful, take me. Right. But on the other hand, if I'm congruent to my values, and if I take my values of commitment, trust, and integrity, no matter what, I will never bend on my principles. People know, hey, you can test more no matter how much you do, but he's a non-compromising guy here, right? That will eventually translate to the organization saying, okay, you can do everything else, but when it comes to commitment, this is Mohan.
Right.
Or, okay, you can say this here, but don't touch his integrity because then it's a hot button.
Right.
So I think that's the fundamental piece. Now, you don't have to be a leader here, but as a leader, I think it's all the more important for you to know that piece.
Yes.
Right. And then the second piece is with your identity comes purpose.
Right.
I need to know, why am I here? Like, why am I the member of this team? Why am I entitled to this role? What is my purpose in life? Is it self-interested or is it for the common good? And I always say that as leaders, you need to put the interest of others above yourself. Now, I know that there might be some other leaders who might challenge me in this piece, but I would talk about it from the context of purpose.
Okay.
Right? That your purpose should always be bigger than you. Because the moment you create your achievement here, you're giving credit always to yourself.
Right.
Whether you explicitly or implicitly say it, it's my achievement.
Right.
But like you said, Deepak, that give credit where it's due becomes harder.
Right.
I give it because I'm seeking recognition. Oh, I'm giving it to him. So see, I'm giving as a manager.
Right.
Or can I just give it without any expectation?
Right.
There's a big difference in my purpose. And then I spoke about the third piece, which is about there's a difference between accepting who you are and embracing who you are.
Mm-hmm.
accepting and saying, hey, this is my flaw, this is my mistake. Normally in resumes, okay, this is my weakness. But embracing is always relationship oriented. This is my improvement, this is my weakness, but I know that someone else is my pillar of strength.
Right.
Can I go to my team member and say, hey, even though I'm the leader, hey, I need my help here. I need your help here.
Right.
It's very hard sometimes if we don't embrace our flaws.
Right.
Right. So I think, so when you come back to identity, like I said, irrespective of a leader or not, I think it's the first thing is to be grounded. And it's again, I think you also touched in the beginning, it's humility and ego for me are two different, they go hand in hand, but they need to be extremely opposite ends of the pole.
Right.
Even with a little bit of ego, there's no concept of humility.
Right.
But humility, as C.S. Lewis said, is not about, thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less.
Less, yes.
Right? There's a big difference. So I think it's that concept. The moment we stay humble, learning culture becomes a lot more exponential. We are more grounded.
Right.
I'm more open and perceptive to learn. I'm also more open to say, hey, I don't know everything. That will also strengthen your identity.
Right.
And that's why I use the word molded, as a potter, with the clay.
Right.
The moment you say this is the pot, then you have to break it down to create another pot.
Another pot, yes.
But leadership is that journey, depending on the context. I kind of keep molding it to see what kind of designs, but you still keep that spin wheel going.
Right.
That is leadership for me. You adapt according to the standards.
Right. Wow. So much I'm learning, man. But you mentioned about pandemic and how
Yes.
it had changed the role of a leader, right? So what's your take? How, if I'm a leader and I'm involved in creating the workplace of the future, right?
Right.
So what should be some of the guidelines that I should follow?
So I think if I touch upon what the pandemic taught us, I think it's two things. One is to understand that don't condone people's emotions. I think it plays a very, very important role because one of the things that happened post the pandemic, I can tell you, is this whole concept of resilience became a huge topic, right? Because people were struggling. People had lost some family members, people lost some friends. Of course, the whole turmoil of just emotionally going through, sitting at home doing much, it took a lot of burden.
Right.
And this whole concept of stress management went even to a point of saying, hey, there's no more stress management, but it is, I'm broken, help me out here.
Right.
And there, we don't really equip leaders to do that, right? And at the same time, I can't look to my family because my family is going through the same struggle. So I'm now kind of externalizing it.
Right.
So we hadn't equipped leaders to look at the side of empathy, but still being, keeping it in the context of not getting to that sympathetic side of it, but still being empathetic, number one. The second thing is building resilience. How can I build social resilience? How can I get them back, to spring back to looking at them? And then the third piece is also, adapting to the new normal. The whole culture of realizing that, okay, today we're in a new setting. How do you get them to bring their confidence back to the new normal? That whole concept of change curve, right? Okay, now I'm in anxious depression. I do not know how the new normal is going to go. So I fall back into the anxiety phase.
Right.
So this is a piece that we have not really made a conscious effort. We may know it in our head sometimes, or may have done it as a program. No program can actually fix this, to be honest.
Right.
As a leader, it needs to be you. You need to be there. And I would say that, like I said, there were 5 things that I would put down here. One is, to be approachable and available at all times, right? Just to be able to just be there for them, just lend that listening here. That was one. The second thing was to communicate with transparency, saying that one of the biggest mistakes we make as leaders, saying, hey, Deepak, I know how you feel. No, we don't.
Right.
Right? If I was in your situation, I would have probably felt the same way. But I don't know it. So it's not an apple to an apple feeling.
Right.
But I need to be there. I need to lend a listening here. I need to be a sounding board. Whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. That's the context. Then, like I said, it's this thing about one of the things that we don't do as leaders too much is introspect or retrospect. I learned this from one of my previous leaders, the concept of journaling.
Okay.
right? I come in on day one. It's something that I'm doing for the last 9 years now.
Okay.
That I come in day one, I journal. What is the worst thing that could happen today? That's my first question, my coaching question,
Okay.
right? I put the worst. I end with the day of what is the worst thing that happened today. And then I come back and see, hey, it was not so bad, right?
It's very bad here, but
Yeah,
actually,
exactly. And what it does, it translates my concept of self doubt to courage also.
exactly.
I'm just worrying about things that is just uncertain, but it's changed the way I've thought, right? So I think this introspection, retrospection is an important piece post the pandemic that we need to kind of invest in. And then I think the last piece is give credit where it's due. Now, giving credit again is never performance based. I think this is another piece where we make mistakes. We only recognize performance. We don't recognize people.
Right.
We don't recognize character. We don't recognize attributes. Why not? So one of the things that we do now is we create awards for the best value-driven person.
Okay.
Seems very cliched, but it is something that's saying, hey, can I recognize Deepak because he is someone who's trustworthy in the team?
Right.
Yeah? It's always performance-based. We're always externalizing the recognition. We're never giving credit for someone who's actually invested.
Right.
Right? We're only recognizing, oh, he's got 300 rupees out of the 100 rupee investment. Never about, hey, he's actually invested 100 rupees. Give him that.
So that sounds like a evolution of rewards and recognition system you're referring to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. Because I think we've lost that piece because reward is always monetizing, right? We always monetize it in one way or the other.
It's against performance, it's monetization.
Correct. And recognition also sometimes becomes very structural or becomes time bound or quarterly recognition.
Right.
Can I not recognize my team member every day?
Right.
Absolutely. But I don't have to recognize them at lengths, but recognize them for what they do, who they are, what they've done for the team, what they've done for me.
Right.
We have fundamentally changed this concept of recognition.
Right.
And that recognition leads to an expectation. So if I don't perform well, I don't get an award.
Right.
So I think these are things post-pandemic we have to change because it becomes less externalizing. Mm-hmm. It becomes more internalizing.
Right.
That you recognize the emotions of the people, you focus more on who they are. And I truly believe this, that if you treat people as people, they will give your best.
Right.
Because the sense of belonging will come automatically. Of course, they will fail. Of course, they will make mistakes, but they will learn. So I think it's a journey that we need to take. But at the same time, you also kind of, the business situation is, I'm not discounting business situation, but you manage those pieces as well. But it's one piece that you have to take into account that it starts there, starts below the iceberg. So the post-pandemic has really taught us that be more mindful of the people that you have around and invest a lot more. If you think you're invested enough, that's where you fail.
So be approachable and available, communicate with transparency, introspect and retrospect more, give credit when due, when and where it's due, and be mindful about people, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned about this reward system. This kind of, again, going here, it says reward people's behavior, which is aligned with the company's core values, let's say. Let's say the company on its website says our core value is transparency. So someone who is being transparent day in, day out, who is invested, as you said, you should recognize that. That's what you are suggesting?
Yeah. And see, exactly. See, recognizing does not mean reward. I think that we have to draw that fundamental.
Recognizing only, yes.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. See, because I can tell you one of the things that I had at a team meeting today, I had a good feedback from one of my team members who came back and said, hey, Mohan, something that you said that I did not agree with you. And I'm glad that you brought it up. I would not have known. Right. Thank you for bringing it up. That is recognition.
Right.
Right. But if he didn't bring it up, or if I didn't take it, or if I didn't go, it would have never happened.
Yes.
And I know that this conversation now will be a more open culture where that person will always come back to me.
Yeah, I think because you have created that openness that he was okay to come and give you that feedback. Hey, Mohan, absolutely. I agree with this. Yeah.
Correct. So you create a psychological safe place where tomorrow people are not afraid to voice up. People are not afraid to share their opinions. People are not afraid to play this us versus them mentality. Right. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to disagree. But you go back as one voice.
Right.
That's a psychological safe place that, we exemplify the intelligence of the team rather than limit it by not saying anything.
Right. No, that's a huge challenge again. I don't know how your experience has been, but as long as I was in the corporate industry, and now I talk to these leaders basically in the corporate world, and communicating in a meeting, whether it's a town hall or it's a normal meeting or something else, people voicing their opinion, it never happens. The percentage of people who voice their opinion is 1%, 2%. This is what I'm hearing, and this is what I also experienced a long time back. So what is stopping these people from voicing their opinion? Maybe an insecurity or a fear. And that is created again by the leadership. Somehow the leadership has to take accountability on that.
Absolutely.
And work towards creating the safe space that you mentioned, right?
Yeah. 100%. And I think sometimes it's just a fear of being judged, right? What will my leader think of me if I say this? Is it is it a discounted question? Is it a, pardon my crude word of saying stupid question? But these are things that come up in the mind.
Yes.
What will my leader think?
Yes.
And that simply, like you said, goes back to the element of the reader as, have I created an opportunity or a psychological safe place to say, hey, it's okay to ask these questions.
Yes.
Right? And it's okay to ask the same question 100 times. And it's okay for me as leader to give you the same answer 100 times.
Right.
That is investment.
Right.
It's not in my role, but it's a responsibility. And I think this is a shift we need to do.
Need to do now, right? Wow, this 4-stage, I'd say 5-stage strategy that leaders can adapt to become more effective and influential at workplace beyond the post-pandemic workplace, right? So this is awesome. Yes, here's a question. It's an important one. So as a leader, we have kind of touched upon this, but I wanted to kind of get a little bit of more, insight from you. So as a leader, does my gender play any role in terms of women leader and men leader? I know how it's a practical problem. And as leaders of the organizations and coaches, we have to deal with these things and we have to discuss, right? So do you think if I am a CXO developing my 20 people and taking them through a leadership program, do you think I should focus on having this gender diversity, or I should focus on the raw material, as you said, the personality traits that these people bring, or the visibility they have created? What should I focus on? And do you think there's still a disparity based on gender when we select the top leaders or CXOs especially? As they say, in the boardroom, the percentage of women leaders is very less, right? So what as a leader should I do to kind of bridge that gap? And the another thing that kind of comes into this men versus women is emotional intelligence, right? So as a leader, it is kind of given, you have to be aware about your own emotions and how they are affecting your performance, your productivity, your creativity, your all that stuff, right? And how is the emotional state of your team members are? As you said, human connect, right? So invest in them, right? So you have to be aware of these things. So when that comes into picture, is there a gap between how men and women leader deal with that emotional intelligence or what they bring to the table? So that's
Now, I want to be very honest and transparent, but I will also try and I don't want to be diplomatic. So let's put it that way. But at the same time, to answer the last part of your question here, Deepak, is of course men and women tend to have different leadership styles because we are wired differently. We are biologically wired differently. I think that's something we have to learn to accept, embrace, adjust, right, and internalize it. That's number one. With that said, the opportunities for leadership positions or leadership growth should not, be from an advantage or disadvantage for anybody. Right. Because attributes of a leader is not contingent for you being a man or a woman. I want to put that as well. I've heard time and time again, saying that many companies say, we have to have women empowerment programs for our women to step up. I completely disagree with it. I don't think we need to empower women. Women are already empowered.
Yes.
We need to create an opportunity where they feel that they can show their empowerment. That is something we've never done. Whether it is unconscious, conscious, whether it's historical, and India being more of a patriarchal organization, it is translated into who we are today. Which is why many organizations, not the more, startups, but if you take the traditional organization, will always have this disparity of, a 70-30 ratio or a 60-40 if you're a more, modernized organization, but sometimes even lesser, really bridge it, right? And I don't know if we'll ever bridge it simply because one is our population piece in the India context, if I only speak India. So the attrition and the influx is always going to be a disparity in that context. Unless we make a conscious hiring to do the disparity the other way. Right. But then the question in that sense is also that when we create positions or when we create rooms, there we need to be unconsciously and consciously, break our stereotypes and break our biases to say, does everybody have the same opportunity?
Right.
Do we have the same growth? Do we have the same programs? So today in Volvo also we have done specific women programs, not to empower them, right? But these are programs to kind of sometimes remove certain biases that they've had because of past history.
Right.
That I need to work 2 times X, to prove that I need to get this position. Now, there might be a fundamental truth to it. Don't get me wrong, right? I am not debating that fact, but it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
That as an organization, we need to come back and say, hey, we value you the same. And are we really walking the talk? So when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to, recognition, when it comes to inclusion, that is something we have to consciously tackle on a day-to-day basis, that everybody is given that. That is one. Now, to answer your question, do we need to bring in more women leaders, whether in or groom? I would say in the current context, yes. Simply because women also, like you said, when it comes to this whole Daniel Goleman or Gary Chapman of emotional intelligence or the 5 life languages, the variance of emotional intelligence can vary, right? And the context of how I adapt my own leadership style to my emotions can be very different from how a woman is. Now, let's also be blunt. Sometimes men, when it comes to, let's say, stresses, sometimes men can easier talk to a man rather than a woman.
Right.
It's just biological. It has nothing to do with corporate. It has nothing to do with history. But of course, doesn't mean a man cannot, share or confide in a woman.
Right.
It takes a little more effort. And I always take this analogy of right hand, left hand. Like I can see, Deepak, that you're holding your pen in your right hand, right? So you probably sign in your right, or you write. But if I had to say, I'm going to tie your right hand for the next 1 year and only sign with your left hand, right? You will get better at it.
Right.
But after 3 years, even if you continuously still sign with your left hand, now you might be equally good with both your right and your left.
Right.
But let's say 5 years down the line, I meet you again and ask you to sign, you'll still take your right hand, your natural hand.
Right.
So it doesn't change who I am, but now I've also become a lot more conscious.
Right.
So as a man, I need to understand, of course, when I say understand, not the feelings of a woman and so on, but I need to understand what are the opportunities I'm providing for women. Am I indirectly condescending them? Am I indirectly not creating opportunities? In my intent might be good, but am I indirectly creating unconscious bias in doing certain things? A simple thing, as a woman, you can't lift this, let me carry it for you. These are unconscious biases we create.
Right.
Right. So I think that is a conscious thing that we have to continuously check. Similarly, I think women also need to do the same. That to understand that maybe men are not so emotionally, drawn to a lot of things. That sometimes men are also emotional, but men do not show it too much. Right. At the same time, men tackle stress in a very different way of how women do. So I think we need to be able to kind of read. There is no amount of reading that will make you better.
Right.
It's just things that we need to consciously challenge ourselves.
Right.
So that's what. So to answer your question, are women better, men are better? I think it's the wrong question to ask, to be honest.
Right.
But do we need more women leaders in the context of today's predicament of how we are disparately proportioned? Absolutely.
Right.
So that would be my answer to your question. Yeah.
I think in the crux of what you said, I think 2 things as a leader or aspiring leader, existing leader, I have to focus on when it comes to gender is I have to create uniform opportunities for all genders.
Right.
Uniform. Everybody has the opportunity to perform or to do, right? Then value contribution, not who is doing it. What is the contribution to the organization, to the team, to the business? Value that and then give them whatever is necessary to grow to the next level, right?
Of course, absolutely.
Give them opportunity when they, kind of perform, value their contribution on each of the opportunities that was there, right? That kind of creates a pretty fair workplace and you don't have to worry about gender. Focus on the opportunity and the contribution, okay?
Yeah. And just to add on there, I think I've seen women respect that a little more, that you create a fair workplace rather than you try to say, oh, there are so many opportunities for women, because then they again feel that they are indirectly the weaker link.
Right.
Because they are not.
Right.
So I think this is also something that organizations need to be mindful of, that I want to be treated fairly. It's a very simple philosophy. But fair does not mean, okay, one man program, 10 women program. For them, that's not fair. Give me
Right.
the same opportunity. That's all. And then you will start to see a whole different dimension of what women can do. Yeah.
Right. Wow. So I think, Mohan, we are good for today. There
Yeah.
are so many different questions we have not touched upon. But as I said, the topic, for example, we discussed trust. For example,
Right.
there is negotiation, there is conflict management,
Right.
emotional intelligence, there is change, leading change. Each
Right.
of these can become their own episodes in
Exactly.
itself, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're pretty good for today. And if
Right.
I am thinking in the terms of a listener who is listening to this with an interest to learn about leadership or aspects of leadership or habits of leadership that they can take back and start implementing, we have given them good amount of content.
I
But
hope so. Yeah.
uh, I think I thoroughly enjoyed it. But
Thank you.
the part again is I will have a season 2 or season 3 when we are talking about it. You will have to come again and we will touch
I
upon
would love to,
we have
Deepak. Thank you
missed,
so much.
right?
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I hope you also enjoyed the discussion.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. It's always a learning, and I hope that the audience would love it as well. So,
I hope so. So thank you for being us today. I'll have you back soon.
yeah.
So thank you for all your insights and experience that you have shared here.
And thank you for hosting me, Deepak. Pleasure. Have a
You're
good
welcome.
day.
Phew, welcome back. That was Mohan Benjamin for you. I don't know how to close this discussion basically, but because I honestly wanted him to keep going, but we had a restriction of time. But I'm promising that in future seasons we will have Mohan back because he has tons of other experience that we have not even touched upon, right? So definitely we'll have him back, but I hope that you have learned a ton from today's episode because I did. And I have not gone through only once, I've gone through this discussion 3, 4 times during editing, okay? And I've thoroughly enjoyed every single time. So I hope you got some pearls of wisdom, some practical strategies that you can take back and start implementing at your workplace and make it future ready. Right. So with that, this is bye from me. I'll see you next Sunday at 8 a.m. again with a new guest, and we'll continue our discussion on leadership. Till then, take care and be limitless.